Warning: this story contains details that are extremely disturbing, details of severe neglect and suffering that will be difficult to hear. But Lacey Fletcher's story needs to be told, because what happened to her is one of the most horrific cases of parental neglect in American history. And it happened not in some abandoned building, not in a hidden basement, but in a regular suburban home, in plain sight. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the American Shadow family. This case shocked the entire nation when details emerged in 2022. Drop your state in the comments below, and please, if this story is too difficult, it's okay to step away. Take care of yourself. This is the story of Lacey Ellen Fletcher, a 36-year-old woman with autism, who spent the last 12 years of her life sitting on a couch, never moving, never bathing, never getting medical care, until her body literally fused into the furniture, and her parents did nothing to stop it. Slaughter, Louisiana. A small town about 20 miles north of Baton Rouge. Population around 1,000. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where neighbors wave to each other, where life moves slow and quiet. And in this quiet town, on a quiet street, Lacey Fletcher was dying, slowly, painfully, for over a decade. Lacey Ellen Fletcher was born on November 4, 1985. She was the only child of Clay and Sheila Fletcher. Clay worked as a police officer. Sheila was a police dispatcher. They were well known in the community, respected, normal. The kind of family you'd never suspect of anything sinister. Lacey was diagnosed with autism at a young age. She also suffered from severe social anxiety, and what some medical experts would later describe as locked-in syndrome, a condition that made it difficult for her to move or communicate. But despite her challenges, Lacey went to school. She attended Brownfields Baptist Academy, a private Christian school. She graduated in 2003 at age 17. After graduation, Lacey became more and more reclusive. She stopped going out. She stopped seeing friends. She stopped leaving the house. And eventually, she stopped leaving the couch. According to her parents, Lacey made the choice to live on that couch. They claimed she refused to get up, refused to move, refused help, and they, as her parents, respected her wishes. But the truth would turn out to be far more horrific. January 3rd, 2022. 911 dispatch in East Feliciana Parish receives a call. It's Sheila Fletcher. She's hysterical, crying. She says her daughter isn't breathing. She found her dead on the couch. The 911 operator guides Sheila through performing CPR. You can hear it on the recording, the desperation, the panic. Sheila and Clay, allegedly trying to save their daughter's life. But it was too late. It had been too late for a long, long time. Emergency responders arrived at the Fletcher home, a modest, well-kept house on a quiet street. Nothing on the outside suggested the horror that waited inside, but when paramedics entered the living room, they were met with a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Lacey Fletcher was sitting upright on a brown leather couch, or at least, what was left of her was. Her body was emaciated. She weighed only 96 pounds. Her skin was covered in feces, urine, maggots. And the worst part, her body had literally fused into the couch. The couch itself was covered in waste, layers and layers of human excrement, urine stains, food remnants. It was like she had been sitting there in the same spot for years, never moving, never being moved, just sitting, rotting. While her parents went about their lives around her, Dr. Ewell Bickham, the East Feliciana Parish coroner, would later say it was the most horrific scene he had ever encountered in his 30-year career. And that's saying something. The autopsy revealed the true extent of Lacey's suffering. She had deep ulcers on her body, bed sores that went all the way down to the bone. In some places, her bones were exposed. She had fecal matter caked into the wounds. She had maggots living in her sores. She was severely malnourished, dehydrated. And according to medical experts, she had been sitting in that same position for at least 12 years. 12 years. Let that sink in. 12 years of sitting on a couch, never standing, never walking, never bathing. never being cleaned, never seeing a doctor, never going outside, just sitting in her own waste, while her body slowly rotted away. The coroner determined that Lacey had actually been dead for 1 to 2 days before her parents finally called 911, which means for at least 48 hours, her body sat there, dead. And they did nothing. The question everyone was asking, how could this happen? How could parents allow their daughter to suffer like this? How could they watch her waste away and do absolutely nothing? Law enforcement had the same questions, and they wanted answers. Clay and Sheila Fletcher were immediately brought in for questioning. At first, they maintained their story. They said Lacey wanted to live on the couch, that she refused to move, that she was an adult and they were respecting her autonomy. But investigators weren't buying it, because Lacey couldn't have made that choice. She was severely disabled. She had autism, she had social anxiety, she had mobility issues, she needed help, she needed care, and her parents, who were supposed to provide that care, abandoned her. The Fletchers told police that Lacey had always been difficult, that she didn't like to be touched, that she didn't want to go to the doctor, that she preferred to stay on the couch. They painted a picture of a stubborn, defiant daughter who refused help. But the evidence told a different story. Lacey didn't refuse help. She was denied help. She was neglected, ignored, left to suffer in unimaginable conditions while her parents lived their lives just feet away. On January 4, 2022, one day after Lacey's body was discovered, Clay and Sheila Fletcher were arrested. They were initially charged with second-degree murder. If convicted, they faced life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case made national headlines. Photos of the scene, though graphic and disturbing, were released to the public, and America was horrified. The images showed the couch, the waste, the conditions Lacey had been living in, and people couldn't believe it. How could this happen? How could no one know? That was the question that haunted the community. The Fletchers were not isolated. They had neighbors. They went to church. Clay had been a police officer. Sheila had been a dispatcher. They were active in their community. People saw them regularly, and yet no one knew what was happening to Lacey. Some neighbors later said they hadn't seen Lacey in years. They assumed she had moved away, or maybe was living in a care facility, but they didn't ask questions, and the Fletchers didn't offer answers. The case went to a grand jury, and in May 2022, Clay and Sheila Fletcher were formally indicted on second-degree murder charges. The district attorney, Sam DeQuilla, made it clear this was not an accident. This was not a case of a daughter who refused help. This was neglect, abuse, and it resulted in Lacey's death. But the legal battle was far from over. The Fletchers' defense team argued that Lacey had made her own choices, that she was an adult, that she had refused medical care. They tried to paint a picture of parents who were doing their best in an impossible situation, but the prosecution wasn't having it. They brought in medical experts, forensic specialists, people who testified that there was no way Lacey could have chosen to live like that her condition required intervention, that her parent had a legal and moral obligation to care for her. And they failed. In June 2023, over a year after their initial arrest, the grand jury re-indicted Clay and Sheila Fletcher on second-degree murder charges. The case was moving forward, and it looked like the Fletchers would face the maximum penalty. But then, in February 2024, something unexpected happened. Clay and Sheila Fletcher entered no contest pleas. They agreed to plead to a reduced charge of manslaughter instead of second-degree murder. In exchange, they avoided a trial and the possibility of life in prison without parole. The prosecution agreed to the plea deal, but only on one condition. They would seek the maximum sentence for manslaughter, 40 years in prison. District Attorney DeQuilla wanted to make sure that even with the reduced charge, the Fletchers would spend the rest of their lives behind bars, a de facto life sentence. On March 20th, 2024, Clay and Sheila Fletcher stood before Judge Catherine Jones for sentencing. It was the moment Lacey's story would finally get some semblance of justice. At the sentencing hearing, Clay Fletcher made a statement that shocked everyone in the courtroom. He said that the couch where Lacey died was her sanctuary. He claimed that Lacey loved that couch, that it was her safe space, that she didn't want to leave it. The audacity of that statement, the complete denial of reality. The couch wasn't Lacey's sanctuary. It was her prison. It was her tomb. And for Clay to stand there and claim otherwise was insulting to Lacey's memory and to everyone who had seen the horrific conditions she died in. Judge Jones was not swayed by the Fletchers' excuses. She sentenced them to 40 years in prison with 20 years suspended. This meant they would serve 20 years before being eligible for supervised release. Both Clay and Sheila were 66 years old at the time of sentencing. If they serve the full 20 years, they'll be 86 years old when they're released, if they live that long. District Attorney DeQuilla addressed the court and the media after the sentencing. He said, "You wouldn't treat your animals like that. No one would leave a dog or a cat to suffer in those conditions, but Lacey was their daughter, and they let her rot." He was right. The Fletchers had treated Lacey worse than an animal. They had allowed her to suffer for over a decade, and they did nothing. They didn't call for help. They didn't take her to a doctor. They didn't clean her. They didn't move her. They just let her sit there, day after day, year after year, until her body gave out. Dr. Ewell Bickham, the coroner who had examined Lacey's body, spoke publicly about the case. He wanted the graphic photos of Lacey's condition to be shown to the public, not for shock value, but to make people understand the severity of what happened. He wanted people to see what neglect looks like, what it does to a human being. He wanted Lacey's suffering to mean something, and he wanted to make sure that no one ever forgets what happened to her. The Lacey Fletcher case sparked a national conversation about how we care for disabled adults, about the systems in place, or lack thereof, to protect vulnerable people, about how someone can disappear from society and no one notices. Lacey should have been protected. She should have been cared for. She should have been loved. But instead, she was abandoned by the two people who were supposed to love her most. Lacey Fletcher's story is a tragedy, but it's also a warning. A reminder that neglect can happen anywhere, in any family, in any community, and that we all have a responsibility to speak up when we see something wrong, to ask questions, to check on our neighbors, to make sure that vulnerable people are being cared for. Because if we don't, more people like Lacey will slip through the cracks and suffer in silence. Today, Clay and Sheila Fletcher are serving their sentences in Louisiana state prisons. They are both eligible for release in 2044, but many believe they should never be released, that they should spend the rest of their lives behind bars for what they did to Lacey. Lacey Fletcher was laid to rest in Louisiana. Her grave is a quiet place, a place where she can finally be at peace, away from the couch, away from the neglect, away from the pain. She was 36 years old when she died. She should have had a full life ahead of her. She should have been loved, protected, cared for, but she wasn't. And now, all we can do is remember her and make sure her story is never forgotten. Thank you for watching American Shadow. If this story affected you, please take a moment. This is a difficult case, and it's okay to feel angry, sad, or overwhelmed. Drop your state in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss our stories. If you know someone with a disability who may be experiencing neglect or abuse, please report it. You can contact Adult Protective Services in your state. You could save a life. Rest in peace, Lacey Fletcher. You deserved so much better. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, if you see something, say something. Your voice matters. Peace.